UFC Fight Night, Song Yadong versus Ricky Simone. Let's get right into it. We have a solid card coming up this weekend. There's been a lot of movement, a lot of fighters who were originally scheduled who had to be rescheduled due to injury or other circumstances surrounding them or their opponent. So that's why this review is coming pretty late in the week. It seems like there's a lot of stuff the UFC had to get figured out pretty last minute on this one, but they were able to put together a solid card here. And in this video, I will break down each of these fights, giving my predictions about each of these fights and what I think the outcome will be. To be honest, these first three fights, I would be completely spewing to you if I tried to give a confident opinion about any of these. I try my hardest to really put some effort into my research. I got my own little method, my special sauce, and there's really not enough tape, and I just didn't really care about these, to be quite frank. So no disrespect to the first three sets of fighters on this card. Hopefully they should be pretty entertaining, but I will not be reviewing them in this video. I'm going to get started right away with Cody Durden versus Charles Johnson. This fight should be pretty interesting. Charles Johnson is the -150 favorite here, coming off that very close loss to Ody Osbourne. He's 3-2 in his last 5 fights, and Cody Durden is 3-2 in his last 5 fights as well, sitting at a +125 underdog. Charles Johnson, we'll start with him. I think he's a good striker with solid size for the division. He's got a crazy chin, took a lot of shots from Ody Osbourne, and his cardio was really impressive in that fight as well. I thought he proved a lot. I thought he could have done enough to get the nod in that fight as well. So I was really impressed with his performance. Obviously, it's hard to say it's hard to really talk about moral victories in this sport. Losses hold a lot of weight to them, regardless of if they should or shouldn't. Sometimes this definitely feels like an instance where Charles Johnson came away from his previous fight perhaps ending it better than perhaps he was going into the fight. Cody Durden, solid fighter in his own right, 3-2 in his last 5, slightly shorter than Charles. I'm going to give the edge to Charles Johnson in this one. I'm guessing this is going to go the distance. I think he'll be able to use his length to get the nod here. Charles Johnson's got that weird hair stuff going on in the back of his head. And I'm a sucker for weird hairstyles and stuff like that, so I'll give him a little edge on that fact as well. So Charles Johnson is the pick in this fight. Moving along to a heavyweight bout, Jake Collier versus Martin Buday. This fight's a pick'em, regardless, despite the fact that Martin Buday has the much better record on paper. He's 11-1, whereas Jake Collier is 13-8. Collier is 2-3 in his last 5 fights. Martin Buday is undefeated in the UFC, but he's only had 2 or so fights. This is one of those instances where you got a fighter with a much better looking record and not being a major favorite in this fight, so that's always interesting. Despite that, I'm still going to go with Buday in this fight. He's got solid cardio for being a bigger fighter, and he does come in at that heavyweight limit at 265 pounds, so he's a massive guy, and despite that, he has the cardio, and he's got solid movement as well. His last fight against Lucas Brzeski, I want to say his name is pronounced, he proved that he's got a very good defensive striking, good head movement, staying out of the way of a lot of those big shots, and he's got the gas tank to keep throwing for 3 rounds. Collier has had the harder competition of these two fighters, certainly, as he's been in the UFC for longer, which does explain why his record is a lot worse. But I just don't see him having as good of speed or accuracy with his striking as Buday, and I think he gets hit a bit more as well, which is when you're dealing with heavyweights. Usually it's whoever gets hit flush first is most likely going down in a lot of these instances. So Buday is going to be the pick there. I don't think he gets a finish in this one, but I think it's a fight where both of them probably slow down significantly in the third round, run out of gas, but Buday just has that little extra gear to win the third round and get the decision win. Our next fight on this card is Josh Quinlan versus Trey Waters. Quinlan has a 6-0 overall record, and Trey Waters has a 7-1 record. His loss being against Gabriel Bonfim in the Contender Series. So you could lose to much worse guys, to say the least. The Bonfim brothers are some savages, so we're not going to deduct too many points from Trey Waters for that. He got subbed in that fight, but when it was on the feed, it was a pretty even fight. Quinlan's got pretty crazy power, with several knockout wins under his belt. Trey Waters is the taller, longer fighter, and I think that's going to benefit him a lot in this matchup. Quinlan is going to have a hard time getting in close, and I think if he gets a little too antsy and a little reckless trying to get in close, Trey Waters can get the finish, like Trey did in a previous fight where his opponent was rushing in a bit recklessly, and he hit him with a combo and pretty much put him out right away. So Quinlan, I think, is definitely an impressive prospect as well, but with the plus odds you're getting with Trey and his striking acumen, how would that work? I'm liking Trey in this fight. Next up is Marcos Rogerigo de Lima versus Waldo Cortez Acosta. Lima is 3-2 in his last 5 and is the favorite in this one at -170. Whereas Waldo is 3-0 in the UFC and he's the +145 underdog. Waldo has been undefeated in the UFC, but some of those fights have been questionable. Had a really close one with Jared Vanderhaar where I believe I thought he won that fight. And against some of these, unranked heavyweights, Waldo has had some issues. So he's been able to sort of get by and get the wins against these guys, but it hasn't been pretty. Lima is a seasoned vet. Waldo is definitely still very young in his MMA career. I think he comes from baseball, so this isn't his first sport. And that experience, I think, is going to plague him in this fight. He's a big body. I don't think he hits quite as hard as Cortez Acosta, but he hits hard enough where if he's able to stumble Cortez Acosta or at least use his striking to get on top of Waldo, to press him up against the cage and get a takedown, I think if Rogerigo de Lima gets on top of him, this fight's probably over. It's just hard to go up against a grappler of his level when you're so young in your MMA career, in Waldo Cortez Acosta's case. So I think he's an intriguing prospect, certainly not one on the level of some of the other guys we've seen as of late, like Tom Aspinall, that dude who's just a freak show, that Brazilian who I'm blanking on his name. Sorry, I'm a casual. But, the dude who's fighting Jairzinho, what's that man's name? Come on now. The dude who just has no reason being a main event fighter. Whatever, it'll come back to me. But Nonetheless, Rogerigo de Lima is the pick. Pardon that. Me getting off topic for a second there. Next up is Julian Erosa versus Francisco Padilla. Erosa is the favorite in this one. He's 3-2 in his last 5. Meanwhile, Fernando Padilla, this is going to be his UFC debut. He's been anticipating this for a couple of years now. He's sitting at a plus 145 underdog. And I just think this is a tough matchup for your UFC debut, getting a guy as seasoned as Julian Erosa. Julian coming off of a head kick KO loss to Oleksiejczuk. Not many people are going to get up from that kick. It was one of the knockouts of the year, certainly. And so, that kick definitely showed that Erosa can get finished. But that's one of those, I'm not going to call it lucky. I don't want to take away from Caceres. But, that's tough. That's tough for anyone. Nonetheless, Erosa is going to be the pick in this fight. I just think he's too experienced. He's good everywhere, good on the feet, good on the ground. I think he could get a submission win here against Padilla. I think that difference in grappling going from the more regional scene to the UFC is going to be really tough for Padilla to overcome. So for that reason, Erosa is the pick. I'll say by sub. Next up is Rodolfo Viera. I think he's one of those Brazilians where it's a H, not a R. So Rodolfo Viera versus Cody Brundage. Viera is a minus 260 favorite in this one. Cody Brundage being a 2-1 underdog. Cody's 2-2 in his last 4 in the UFC. Rodolfo's 3-2 in his last 5 in the UFC. I'm going to go with Cody, guys. I'm not going to let that number scare me too much. Rodolfo is definitely one of the best grapplers in the UFC. I'm not going to deny that from him. He's a big, strong dude. If he gets his hands on you, you're in serious trouble. But I sort of struggle with some of these guys who are a bit too one-dimensional. In his case, he's a guy who his body is built for grappling and not much else. He sort of gasses if he spends too much time on the feet. Fight obviously always starts standing. He does have a lot of these submission wins in the UFC, so he's shown an ability to finish these guys if he gets in advantageous positions versus them. So Cody's definitely going to be weary of that. He's not going to mess around on the ground with this guy. He's going to just focus on staying away from the cage, keeping his distance. And if Rodolfo gets too laser focused on a takedown, I think that could be problematic for him, especially if he's never able to get that takedown. So Cody Brundage is the pick. I see Rodolfo making it to the second and third round and then gassing, so potential live betting opportunity there. So I think a Brundage decision or a later in the fight KO is a possibility here. Moving along to the co-main, it is Caio Borralho. The man's got Ohio in his name. Crazy. He is 5-0 in his last 5. This guy's been tearing through people in the UFC. Looked incredibly impressive on the Contender Series. Hasn't shown much sign of slowing down, so the UFC has really picked up the competition for Caio. And he's definitely facing his most dangerous opponent yet in Michal Oleksiejczuk. He's 4-1 in his last 5. One of those wins being over Sam Alvey, just a violent KO of Sam Alvey. And Oleksiejczuk has shown that he's got crazy powers in his hands. He's definitely got some of that Polish power that we see from Jan Blachowicz. This fight, Caio is a very heavy underdog. I think he's the biggest, not underdog, biggest favorite on the card, I meant to say, at minus 360s. And Oleksiejczuk is sitting at plus 285. So those numbers do kind of scare me, I'll be honest. I think that line's a little inflated. I would expect it to be a bit closer, especially with how we've seen Oleksiejczuk KO people. But what that's telling me is that people think Caio will be able to get into a grappling exchange and probably take Oleksiejczuk's back and sub him, which I do see that happening in this fight. I think a sub is imminent for Caio. I wouldn't risk a money line play here. I just don't see the value in that. And if Oleksiejczuk is able to land on Caio and on the feet, that could be problematic. Definitely, I don't think he's ever been hit crazy hard certainly in his UFC career. So he's going to be looking to avoid that. If you're going to play the stand-up game, he's really going to be risking his undefeated UFC record. So I think he's smart enough to limit the amount of time he spends on his feet, not get too reckless when going for a takedown, but if he's able to mix in his grappling with his striking, and get on Oleksiejczuk's legs, I see Caio winning this fight. So Borralho is the pick. And we have our main event, Song Yadong versus Ricky Simón. This fight is really as close as it gets. The betting lines do support that. And man, this is a tough one. I mean, both guys, you have Ricky Simón on one hand, dark horse of the division, five fight win streak. He's got that win over, man, what is wrong with me? A win over, what's his name's head. Dude, long day. I am in the middle of moving and my brain is not working optimally as a result. But he's got that win over Merab's head. That's, looks really good right now because Merab's just on a stupid tear. That was Simón's UFC debut as well. He lost a couple in a row, but then got right back in the win column and has not looked back. And not only has won these fights, but he's frankly dominated. He destroyed Jack Shore. He looked like he had the grappling advantage and showed just how strong he is. I mean, Simón might be one of the strongest guys in the division. I'd probably put him or Merab at that up there for the strongest guys. So if he gets his hands on you, it's hard to get him off. But then you have Song Yadong on the other hand, kind of kid wonder out of China. His experience far exceeds his age. He's only 25, yet has a boatload of UFC experience, even with some of that 5-round experience. Coming off a loss to Corey Sandhagen, which he definitely showed that he can hang with Sandhagen. Sandhagen was just a bit too crafty, found a way to get a deep cut on him with some creative elbows. But honestly, I think that fight just aged Song Yadong in a good way. I'm sure he took a lot away from that fight. Saw what it's like to strike with, you're not going to get much better at striking in this bantamweight division than Corey Sandhagen. So when looking at these two, I'm going to give a slight edge and explosiveness to Song Yadong. He's got crazy power, throws really clean strikes and good accurate strikes. He's going to have the height advantage in this one as well. So he'll be able to use range a little bit versus Ricky Simón, although it's not anything super significant or anything that I think Ricky isn't used to, being a compact guy for the division. And I think if Song Yadong can keep Simón at arm's length and medium distance, I think that benefits him a lot, and he'll get the win. I think he can find a finish in this fight versus Ricky Simón. Ricky's a hard guy to put away. It doesn't get much harder to put someone away than him, but also does not have too much 5-round experience. I'm not sure if he actually has fought a 5-round. I don't think he has fought a 5-round fight in the UFC, where Song Yadong does have that under his belt. So it'll be interesting to see how these two guys pace themselves. I'm sure Song is a little pissed about having his fight ended a bit prematurely versus Sandhagen, and he's going to look to get back in the win column here. I say Song Yadong KO, catching Ricky Simón, perhaps shooting at his legs and getting a knee, landing a knee flush on him while he's at like waist level. I could see that happening in this fight. So Song Yadong by KO is the pick. Thank you so much for watching. This is going to be the last video in my apartment here. I'm going to be moving spots this weekend, so it's going to be a crazy one for me, but going to try and do up the new spot, get a nice little studio, if you will, at the new crib. Going to get the mic going, so it's full steam ahead from here on out. So thanks for sticking around with me. This is Phone Home MMA signing off. Enjoy your weekend. Peace, y'all.